Welcome to WhiskyCast, cask strength conversation featuring news and interviews from the world of whiskey. I'm Mark Gillespie. This is episode number 947 for May 9th, 2022. Coming up in a few minutes.
Drinking bourbon should be an experience. It should transport you to a different place. It should take you from, where you're at this moment to somewhere else. And that's what we found with Reflection.
Blue Run Spirits has been making a mark on the whiskey world over the last couple of years, especially with Bourbon Hall of Fame master distiller Jim Rutledge on the team. Jim's latest creation for Blue Run is Reflection 1 Bourbon. Blue Run co-founder Mike Montgomery and the company's new director of whiskey, Shaylyn Gammon, join me later on WhiskyCast In-Depth. We'll also have the What I'm Tasting This Week department, Your Voice, May's Whiskey Club of the Month, and a whole lot more. The news is next on this week's WhiskyCast.
Hey friends, Gabriel Cardarello with Dewars, Whiskey and Golf, a match made in Scotland. Whether you shot a 72 or a 92, whiskey has its place after every day on the course. Which is why I'm excited to introduce to you your new favorite round after a round, Dewars 19-Year-Old Champions Edition. A special 19-year whiskey finished in first fill rye and new American oak barrels.
And now, a message from Robin Redbreast. Ever wondered where Redbreast got its name? Well, let's go back to 1912 and be glad our bird-watching founder didn't spot the bar-tailed godwit that day.
Proud sponsor of WhiskyCast. Redbreast. Pass it on.
Let's get started with the news. It's brought to you by the Dalmore. We now know what the new Elixir Distillers distillery that's being built on Islay will be named Port na Truan. The name comes from Scots Gaelic for place of the stream and is based on the farm estate just east of Port Ellen where the distillery is being built. Visitors will be able to see the site during the Islay Festival of Malt and Music later this month, but production is not expected to begin until early 2024. The Spirit of Speyside Festival wrapped up successfully with the presentation of this year's Whisky Awards. Judges picked gold and silver medal winners in 4 categories. Ben Riach, 12-year-old, won the gold medal for single malts 12 years and younger. Ben Romick, 10, took the silver medal. The Glenlivet 15 won gold for malts 13 to 20 years old, while the Aberlour 16 won the silver. And the Balvenie 21-year-old won gold for malts over 21 years old. Altmore 21 took the silver. For no age statement malts, Tam Navulin's Spanish Grenache cask won gold, while Aberlour Abuna took the silver. During the festival's opening dinner, the Glenlivet's Alan Winchester was honored with the Spirit of Speyside Lifetime Achievement Award. Steph and Lauren Murray were named Ambassadors of the Year. Annabelle Meikle was named International Ambassador of the Year, and Billy Wright was named the winner of this year's Unsung Hero Award. Congratulations to all. With the Islay Festival coming up at the end of this month, we have details coming out now on this year's festival releases. Bunnahabhain will have 3 festival releases, including the no-age statement Avon Areg, which is a combination of whiskey matured in PX sherry and octave casks. There's also a 1998 French Calvados cask finish. Both will be available worldwide. The distillery will have a peated Tokai finish exclusively available during the Feis. Lagavulin has a 12-year-old Feis bottle that will go on sale at the distillery on its festival day, May 28th, while Kalila's 15-year-old Feis bottling goes on sale 2 days later, and Laphroaig will have its annual Carchas bottling. I've mentioned Ardbeg's Ardcore bottling before. The committee edition is already out, while the regular version will go on sale during the festival. I'll have my tasting notes for the committee edition in a few minutes. And we'll be keeping an eye out for other Feis releases as they're unveiled. Golf's U.S. Open is a little more than a month away, and Dewars is out with its second annual U.S. Open commemorative bottling. This year's version of the 19-year-old Champions Edition is matured exclusively in American oak, and as master blender Stephanie McLeod told me, it's a throwback to a previous release.
We did something similar to this for I don't know if you remember Scratched Cask.
Oh, yeah.
And I loved that product. And I was always wanting to recreate it. And so it was a very similar, what we had to watch was obviously we didn't want the new wood to overpower everything else. So using mostly bourbon and then much less of the new oak and then a smaller amount of the rye. Not because, the rye would cause us a problem, but really because rye is still a little bit more difficult to get hold of than other types of American whiskey. So it was a really nice project to work on.
This year's edition will be available in limited amounts for around $90 a bottle. You'll find my tasting notes for it at the WhiskyCast website. And full disclosure, Dewar's is a sponsor of WhiskyCast. Other releases of note this week, Arizona's Whiskey Del Bach will release Frontera this Saturday. It's the distillery's classic whiskey finished for an additional 13 months in Spanish oak PX sherry casks, and it'll be the first in a series of annual small batch releases for Whiskey Del Bach. Kentucky's New Riff is out with a sherry cask finished 100% malted rye whiskey. It's a follow-up to the original release of a malted rye last year, but this one is finished in a combination of PX and Oloroso sherry casks. It's available in limited amounts for around $65 a bottle. And Luxco is out with Alias Rye. It's from the Ross and Squibb Distillery in Lawrenceburg, Indiana, also known as MGP. But unlike the 95% rye that distillery is famous for, this one has a mash bill of 51% rye, 45% corn, and 4% malted barley. There's no word on pricing. Last time around, I mentioned that Johnnie Walker will be releasing a pulp-based bottle for some of its whiskeys as a way to decrease packaging waste. Diageo is also testing another idea with Johnnie Walker to see whether consumers will go for the so-called bottle for life. The idea is being floated in the UK. In theory, customers would receive a ceramic bottle that could be topped off with whiskey delivered in 50 cl recyclable aluminum bottles on a subscription basis. UK consumers are being invited to register their interest at the Johnnie Walker website, but there is no guarantee that the program will actually hit the market one day. You can keep up with the latest whiskey news all week long at whiskycast.com and on our social media feeds. The news is brought to you by the Dalmore.
Hello, Richard Patterson here, Master Distiller, Master Blender for the Dalmore. Whenever the team and I are in the world sharing our exceptional single malt, we like to keep in touch with Mark Gillespie and the latest news from WhiskyCast.
Don't forget to join us Friday nights at 5 p.m. New York time for the Happy Hour Live webcast. If you missed last Friday night's show with photographer Ernie Button and whiskey writers Nino Kilgore Marchetti and Kyle Swartz, the on-demand replay is available now at the WhiskyCast YouTube channel. By the way, congratulations to Juan Cruz. He paid attention during the webcast and wins a copy of Ernie Button's new book, The Art of Whiskey. We'll be sending that out this week. Time now for the WhiskyCast calendar of events brought to you by Catoctin Creek Distilling. We have two major spirits auctions on Tuesday, Bonham's in Paris and at Sotheby's in New York City. Binny's World of Whiskies is on Wednesday and Thursday in Lincoln Park, Illinois, just ahead of Whiskey Fest Chicago Friday night, and Distill America in Madison, Wisconsin this Saturday. The Lyon Whiskey Festival is also this coming weekend in Lyon, France. Gordon and MacPhail's Richard Urquhart leads a Scotch whiskey dinner on the 17th in Pasadena, California, and the Toulouse Whiskey Festival is on May 20th and 21st in Toulouse, France. Whiskey Live London returns that same weekend. The Campbellton Malts Festival runs from May 24th through the 26th, just ahead of the Islay Festival of Malt and Music. It starts on May 27th and runs through June 4th. Remember, all in-person events are still subject to change on short notice, and you may have to show proof of vaccination or a recent negative COVID test in order to attend. The calendar of events is brought to you by Catoctin Creek Distilling, makers of the Virginia Rye Whiskey. You'll find their Roundstone Rye at fine whiskey shops in 26 U.S. states, 3 continents, and online. Visit the new buyvirginiarye.com site for more details, and please drink responsibly.
And now, a message from Robin Redbreast.
Small batch. How would you describe it? It's like an Irishman's understanding of baseball. Extremely limited.
Proud sponsor of WhiskyCast. Redbreast. Pass it on.
WhiskyCast In-Depth is brought to you by Mortlock and the Classic Malts lineup. Blue Run Spirits has only been selling bourbons for a little less than 2 years now, but it's already made a name for itself with whiskey lovers. Of course, it helps when you have someone like Bourbon Hall of Fame distiller Jim Rutledge as part of the team, sharing his decades of experience. Jim's latest whiskey for Blue Run is Reflection 1 Bourbon. I sat down over a glass with Blue Run co-founder Mike Montgomery and his team's brand new director of whiskey, blender Shaylyn Gammon, on a Zoom call this week. So, Mike, I want to start with you. Give me the Blue Run Spirits origin story, because you guys have done some interesting stuff over the last couple of years, but what prompted you and your colleagues to get into the spirits business in the first place?
Well, Mark, first of all, I want to thank you for having us on. It's a real pleasure having a chance to talk to you, because we followed you for a long time, long before we even launched. And so it's kind of, I wouldn't call it a childhood dream, because no child really dreams of being on a podcast about bourbon, but we'll call it a middle-aged dream, right?
You're flattering me.
But it's all true. It's all very true. So this was kind of the culmination of what we can probably call professional struggle, and trying to figure out how to find paths that really kind of excited us. I've always felt an entrepreneurial itch, but hadn't quite figured out how to scratch that itch. And so I guess this was 2018. One of my co-founders, Jesse McKnight, called me and he said, "Hey, somebody wants to sell me some barrels of bourbon. What should we do?" And he's the type of partner who I can call, and vice versa. He can call me and say, "I've got a crazy idea. Let me bounce it off of you." And so that was the start of Jesse just saying, "Hey, there's this opportunity. What should we do?" And my kind of snap judgment was nothing, right? It sounded like somebody had 2 barrels, and that's not a business. And but it set us down this path of kind of discovery, we'll say, where we started looking more and more at the business side of the industry rather than the I like to drink bourbon side of the industry. And the more due diligence that I did, the more I kept seeing that there was a real opportunity, that obviously the sector is experiencing phenomenal growth. And, it's really a hockey stick sort of growth trajectory, fueled partially by my purchases. But we had this sneaking suspicion that we didn't want to approach this along the lines of the definition of insanity, right? Which is doing the same thing over and over again and expecting a different result. So what that means is we didn't want to go pick out a standardized wine bottle. We didn't want to name it very, very old Marks or ancient Gillespies. And we wanted to figure out if there was a way to modernize the approach, modernize the look and feel, while still maintaining I guess being rooted to the heritage of the industry. And so we thought that if we could pull that off, then maybe we'd have something. And so that was really the genesis of the idea. That's where it started from. And that's really what's driving us today.
How'd you get hooked up with Jim Rutledge, though?
Amazing luck, timing. I know you and Jim go way back. And I've been a big fan of Jim's for a very long time. Without having met him, without knowing him, right? It's like being a fan of like Michael Jordan's, and knowing that Michael Jordan was good at playing basketball, Jim Rutledge, good at making bourbon. And so that was one of the pieces that we were really looking for was, we thought we would do well on the aesthetics of the brand and what it would look like and how we wanted to market it and how we wanted to speak with consumers. That side of the business we felt very confident about. But when you get into bottling, putting actual liquid into bottles, that takes a unique skill set. And we really, as outsiders to the industry, we really wanted someone who knew what they were doing. And so why not start with Jim? And so Jesse, whose name you'll probably hear a lot, had a relationship with someone who knew Jim. And I remember it like it was yesterday. We were all sitting in this conference room and Jim walks in and, all of a sudden I felt like it was sitting in a library or something, it got really quiet and didn't take long to break the ice, but it was kind of a starstruck moment for all of us. And so we talked a little bit. We gave Jim insight into what we were attempting to do. Now, granted, at the time, Mark, we didn't own a single barrel. We didn't have a mock-up of what this was going to look like. We had a name that we had to ditch because of copyright concerns. But I think we gave Jim a good enough glimpse into who we are and our enthusiasm for making this work. And so we just asked him point blank, would you consider working with us? And he got really quiet for a moment. And, what that moment felt like it was an hour. It's probably about 5 seconds. And he said, sure. Yeah, let's do something together. And it's been great ever since. Jim is one of the kindest people I've ever met. You strip out the distilling and the decades of knowledge that he has, and he's just a nice guy. He's somebody I want to hang out with. I want to talk to him. He tells great stories. He cares. He's a very conscientious person. So we're incredibly lucky to have formed a relationship with Jim. It's just I would also venture to say, had we not figured out a way to work with Jim, we probably wouldn't be doing this today.
I know Jim has had dreams of building his own distillery. Is that something you guys could work with him on in the future, or do your plans not include having your own distillery?
Well, I know Jim's been working really hard with his partners to attempt to build a distillery, and I think there would be nothing better than to have for Jim to have his own distillery. We've been on a slightly different path. Our founding business model didn't really contemplate the idea of a distillery. At the same time, the idea of controlling our own destiny is something that is kind of intriguing, I should say. as supply continues to dry up, as contract distilling opportunities seem to get pushed out farther and farther, and in some instances, some of the distilleries that we've spoken with are full through 2025. So there are constant kind of mile markers that we need to stop at and have conversations with the team about where we want to go and where, kind of what we want to look like and be when we grow up. And if that is today or a year from now or a decade from now, we're still trying to figure that out.
Part of that growing up process includes bringing Shaylyn Gammon on as your whiskey director. I want to bring Shaylyn in right now and tell us about your background, first of all, and how you wound up working with these guys.
Yeah, I am relatively new to the team. I started officially February 1st of this year. I had the great fortune of working at Campari for almost 8 years. Campari, of course, owning Wild Turkey, Russell's Reserve, a bunch of other great brands. And I really received I had my educational background, food science from the University of Kentucky. But really I got another education, when I stepped into the doors at Campari, working under the Russells and getting to do such a plethora of different types of projects. Being on a really small team and the exposure of working for the North American portfolio. So tequila, rum, of course, whiskey, vodka, and really kind of hung my hat, so to speak, in the whiskey category. Just by nature of working at Wild Turkey Distillery every day, that's where our North American Technical Center was, and working with the Russells and being around whiskey all day long. So came to grow in love and, did so many special projects while I was there, so many LTOs. And I'm, was actually going out, selecting the barrels, doing the blends, and then, supervising as that product was made. And beyond that, doing stability testing, like there's the whole technical aspect of everything we're doing, sensory testing for 2 years post a new product. So, here I was doing my thing. And then I was pregnant with my son and I started talking to Blue Run, and they were just so incredibly understanding of where I was at that point in my life. And they were excited about me, and I was excited about them as I saw what the brand was starting to do, and really just, we kind of took a chance on each other. And they gave me great freedom and liberty to come over, and they said, this is your sandbox. Like, you can play, you can kind of do anything that maybe you've been wanting to do. And who can say no to that, and they're such nice guys. And honestly, I loved the fact that each of them really came in to the industry unclouded by, previous, they each came from their own respective careers prior to that. So they didn't have this preconceived notion of what the industry should be. And with that, they brought such fresh energy. And I think that's a large reason of why the brand has been so successful and so disruptive.
I want you to tell me about the process of creating an award-winning bourbon last year without ever having gotten to taste it. I saw the piece that Maggie Mendersky wrote for the Louisville Courier Journal that came out this week. Tell me about that process.
Yeah, I mean, an honor. What I think people don't quite understand that inherently is that so much of taste is smell, about 70%. And so, being pregnant, I chose not to drink. But the show goes on, you still have to create products. So essentially I blended this product based on aroma alone, which is honestly how I approach blending. But of course, in the end, I am tasting. So in this case, I did not get to taste. and just had to have, of course, others around me taste, including Eddie. And to my surprise, this product wound up winning such a wonderful award, essentially, from Fred. So
yeah, our pal Fred Minnick named it the best American whiskey of the year last year. That's a pretty high praise coming from Fred.
Yeah. Yes, it sure is.
So how do you top it with Blue Run?
It's just the tip of the iceberg for her, Mark. I'll just say that. There's so much more coming.
So how do you top it?
Oh, that's a great question. I don't know. I believe in not setting out to I'm going to top this. And that's I think you have to very much lead with what, kind of feels right. A lot of blending is inherent and it's intrinsic. You can't force it. It's truly art. You're sitting there and you're with the Russell's product, that you're referring to, it took forever. And normally blending is a very straightforward, kind of quick, I know what to do. So you can't force it. And I think innovation when it comes to Blue Run is going to be similar in that, we're going to do what feels right for the brand. And that will reveal itself over time. But, we're not going to be a me too, and we're not looking to one up for the sake of one up or one upping.
I'm sitting here sipping on a glass of Reflection 1, the new bourbon that you guys have just released. Tell me the story behind this one, Mike.
Well, it's one we're really excited about. This was kind of the kind of a happy accident, let's call it. This was before Shaylyn had joined, and I had asked for some samples to be sent from a variety of different barrels, and unfortunately the message got lost, and I got a giant box of 200 milliliter samples from the same barrel. And so I started playing around with it and having some fun and seeing what could be done with it, whether it was the 121.6 proof that it came as, or if we could just find the happy medium. And at the time, there was a lot happening, and I won't get into too many personal details, but there was a pretty serious medical issue in my family. At the same time, COVID was raging around the world. My daughter was doing Zoom school from home. It was I think no matter who you are or where you lived, it was a pretty difficult time in 2020.
Yeah.
And what I found is that I kept going back to this bourbon at this proof. I found that it was approachable. It put me in either the right frame of mind or a better frame of mind. So it was, let's say it was a very good mood alterer. And I think it's aptly named because it really kind of put me in this state of reflection. And so one of my other co-founders, Devin McKinney, was coincidentally experiencing some very similar issues in his own life. And so we shared this with each other, and it was our go-to. And so we didn't have a name for it, but as we talked about it more and more, we thought, Reflection is a perfect name for this bourbon. Drinking bourbon should be an experience. It should transport you to a different place. It should take you from, where you're at this moment to somewhere else. And that's what we found with Reflection. So we're excited about it. This is Reflection 1, which gives you a little bit of a hint about the fact that maybe there's a Reflection 2 coming. But before that, there's going to be a batch 2 of Reflection 1. As you think about kind of the basic tenets of what Blue Run is all about. We've been very focused on the idea of youth, aspiration, and inclusivity. And the idea of youth isn't, we want to serve alcohol to underage minors. It's that we feel that there's a younger consumer base out there that's very interested in bourbon. And they don't yet have a true brand affinity. So we seek to provide them with the opportunity to find brand affinity with us. Aspiration, this is something that we want people to drink when they're celebrating, or they're breaking through glass ceilings, or, they want to have an elevated experience. And inclusivity, just generally, when you look at the vast base of bourbon drinkers, it's much like the United States is. It's diversifying, and so we want to provide the opportunity to broaden the base of bourbon drinkers, whether they're currently drinking bourbon or they're bourbon curious. Maybe they drink rum. Maybe they drink extra añejo tequila. Those are all they're neighbors to bourbon, and so we're attempting to appeal to this broader base. And so reflection, I think, also is that it can be a gateway bourbon for people. I think you'll find, Mark, that it's very, very accessible, but at the same time, I think it's got enough unique characteristics to it that even seasoned bourbon drinkers like yourself will say, hey, this is interesting.
No arguments there. One final question for you. Where did the butterfly come from in the bottle?
Well, that's all thanks to Devin McKinney. When you think about the ideas of where this all started, and that we didn't want to do things the way they've been done before, a really good symbol of change is a butterfly. And the idea of a metamorphosis. We've seen other sectors in the spirits industry experience great change and great disruption. Vodka had its heyday. Tequila is probably currently in it, but there hasn't been a lot of disruption yet in American whiskey. And so we really embraced the idea of change. And this all kind of sprung from Georgetown, Kentucky, which, where we spent time, and Jesse McKnight grew up there, on the banks of what he used to call the Blue Run, Royal Spring. And, the state butterfly was the genesis of it. But when we really got down to it, it's the idea of change. And this butterfly should represent change. And it should also really stand out on a shelf or in your home bar.
By the way, we have asked Jim Rutledge for interviews several times over the last couple of years. He has preferred to let his whiskeys do the talking these days. That's WhiskyCast In-Depth, brought to you by Mortlock, whiskey's best-kept secret. Hidden away for decades in some of the world's most famous Scotch whiskies, comes a single malt inspired by an original for a fortunate few. Discover the entire Mortlock lineup at malts.com. The What I'm Tasting This Week department is brought to you by Sagamore Spirit. Let's start with Blue Run's Reflection 1 Bourbon. It was distilled under contract at Castle & Key back in 2018 and is bottled at 47.5% ABV. The nose has notes of cherries and butterscotch, along with a hint of peach pie, and subtle traces of leather and tobacco in the background. The taste has a nice balance of subtle spices, maple sweetness, garden herbs, butterscotch, honey, and dried fruits. And the finish is long with gentle spices. Jim's done it again. I'm scoring Blue Run Reflection 1 Bourbon a 93. Meanwhile, Castle & Key's first 2022 release of its Restoration Rye whiskey comes from barrels between 3 and 5 years old. It's bottled at 56.5% ABV. The nose is aromatic, nutty, spicy, and complex, with touches of roasted cashews, baking spices, grilled peaches, honey, and vanilla. The taste is spicy and intense, with clove, cinnamon, allspice, nutmeg, molasses, and hints of pipe tobacco, honey, and vanilla in the background. The finish is long and dry with wood spices and hints of molasses and pipe tobacco. I'm scoring the 2022 batch number 1 of Castle & Key's Restoration Rye a 95. This week's tasting notes are brought to you by Sagamore Spirit Rye Whiskey. Rye Day the 13th is coming up, and while Friday the 13th may be thought of as unlucky, Rye Day the 13th will be a very lucky day for one whiskey lover. Sagamore Spirit is giving you the chance to go on the Sagamore Spirit Rye Treat. It's a VIP distillery experience, including a trip to Sagamore Farm and an overnight stay at the Sagamore Pendry Hotel on Baltimore's waterfront. Visit sagamorespirit.com/Rye the 13th to enter, and please drink responsibly. Next up, the spring 2022 edition of Old Fitzgerald Bottled in Bond. This one was distilled in the fall season of 2004, making it a 17-year-old wheated bourbon. Of course, it is bottled at 50% ABV, and the nose has touches of caramel apples, subtle spices, spearmint, tobacco leaf, and new leather. The taste is dry and oaky with tannins balanced by wood spices, hints of cocoa, coffee beans, and dark chocolate, along with hints of dried fruits leading into the finish. Now, if you add some water, it opens up that dark chocolate note, along with bringing out apples and peaches. The finish is long, dry, and oaky with hints of fruity character, and I'm scoring the spring 2022 edition of Old Fitzgerald Bottled in Bond a 92. My Kentucky Derby Dram Saturday night was the I.W. Harper Cabernet Cask Reserve Bourbon. As you can guess from the name, it's finished in Cabernet Sauvignon wine casks and is bottled at 45% ABV. The nose has touches of red grapes, caramel, red apples, peaches, honey, and vanilla. The taste starts off fruity at first with notes of apples and peaches. Then the spices come alive with white pepper and a hint of clove, along with honey and caramel in the background. The finish is long and fruity with a hint of lingering spices, and I'm scoring the I.W. Harper Cabernet Cask Reserve from Diageo a 91. Finally, let's look at Ardbeg's Ardcore Committee Edition. This one is bottled at 50.1% ABV. The regular version will be bottled at 46%. The nose is smoky and phenolic with hints of heather, coffee beans, creosote, and molasses. The taste is smoky with a burst of spices at first, followed by dark chocolate, coffee beans, toffee, and a hint of lime. The finish is long and well-balanced between smoke, soot, and sweetness. I'm scoring Ardbeg's Ardcore a 93. The What I'm Tasting This Week department is brought to you by Sagamore Spirit. I'll be adding these tasting notes to our searchable list of more than 3,300 different whiskeys from all over the world. Check it out this week at whiskeycast.com.
Dewar's Champions Edition 19-year was produced in partnership with the USGA by Master Blender Stephanie McLeod for the 122nd U.S. Open to commemorate the site at Brookline where American Francis Ouimet won the legendary 19th U.S. Open in 1913, sparking a golf boom in the United States. Prior to bottling, this limited edition 19-year whiskey goes through Dewar's time-honored double-aging process and then takes things up a notch by being finished in new American oak barrels and first-fill rye casks. The result? Well, a Scotch whiskey that is as rich and complex as the great game of golf. Dewar's 19 years about celebrating those days on the links, bonding with friends and family, forging new friendships, and hopefully keeping on the short stuff and out of the cabbage. This whiskey honors the U.S. Open's mantra of from many, one. From many barrels, one truly championship whiskey.
It's time to announce May's Whiskey Club of the Month, and congratulations to Share the Spirit in Richmond Hill, Ontario. Phil Thorpe sent us this email to nominate his club. Here's what he had to say. I started listening to your podcast about 8 months ago and thoroughly enjoy listening to it every week. Thank you for being such an incredible whiskey ambassador. My wife Suzanne and I started our whiskey journey about 15 years ago. It became a hobby and an obsession. In July of 2019, we decided we wanted to share the whiskey we had collected and started our own whiskey club called Share the Spirit. We had our first in-person tasting in July of 2019. After COVID hit, we had to pivot to virtual tastings. Last night was our 18th tasting, and we now have 21 members. We provide the spirit to our members at no cost, and we have tasted over 106 different whiskeys as a club. My wife and I have also participated in numerous virtual tastings, have been to Scotland and a number of live whiskey shows, and we are now up to about 1,100 whiskeys tasted and counting. It's great to collect and taste whiskey, but it is even better to share the spirit. Thank you for considering our club for Whiskey Club of the Month. Phil, thank you for nominating your club and sharing the spirit with your friends. We'll be sending you and Suzanne 24 WhiskyCast Glencairn glasses to use at your club's tastings. Now, if you're in a whiskey club and would like to nominate your club for next month, all you have to do is do like Phil did and use the contact form at whiskycast.com to get in touch with us. Tell us a bit about your club, and if you're active on social media or have a website, we'll be glad to add a link on the Whiskey Clubs page at our website so other like-minded whiskey lovers can find you. Once again, congratulations to the Share the Spirit Whiskey Club of Richmond Hill, Ontario, Canada, our Whiskey Club of the Month for May. And thanks to Glencairn Crystal for helping us support whiskey clubs around the world. Let's open up the inbox now for Your Voice, brought to you by Scarabus Islay Single Malt Scotch Whiskey. Got this email the other day from Michael Oey. Been listening to WhiskyCast over the past couple of years or so, and have really enjoyed it and learned a lot. One question, which I'm not sure you've ever answered on the podcast. I'm a whiskey enthusiast, not a professional. Do you recommend any whiskey education courses that would help me to expand my knowledge base? Any advice would be much appreciated. Well, I'm going to be brutally honest here. Unless you are trying to get a job in the whiskey industry and need some kind of a certification to beef up your resume, you'll save a lot of money and get just as much education reading some of the many whiskey books that are out there. All of the stuff you'll learn in those classes has usually been covered over and over again in print, and the only difference is that there's no test at the end of the books. Now, if you really need a professional certification for work, then by all means, spend the money and take one of the courses that are offered by groups like the Council of Whiskey Masters, Moonshine University, Whiskey Ambassador, and the like. Michael, I hope this helps. If you have a question, suggestion, or anything else you'd like to share with whiskey lovers around the world, you can always get in touch with me on social media. I'm on Twitter, Facebook, and Instagram at WhiskyCast. The email address is comments@whiskycast.com. Your Voice is presented by Scarabus, the unique Islay single malt, forged by the whiskey-making traditions of 3 generations of the Lang family. Look for it at your local Total Wine & More store in the U.S. and specialist whiskey shops worldwide. You can find out more at hunterlang.com. Let's close out the show now with Behind the Label, our look at the history, science, and people that make whiskey unique. It's brought to you by Writer's Tears. Last week, we looked at an unusual bottled and bond triple mash whiskey from Jack Daniel's, one that blends bottled and bond Tennessee whiskey with rye and malt whiskeys, all from the same distilling season. And since all 3 of the components meet the other requirements for bottled and bond whiskeys, the final blend can be called bottled and bond as well. So that leads us to another question. Could someone create a bottled and bond Scotch whiskey? The answer is, in theory, yes, but it would have to be a single malt or a single grain. That's because the changes in U.S. regulations for bottled and bond status that took effect at the end of the Trump administration specifically allowed for spirits made outside the United States to be labeled as bottled and bond, as long as they meet all of the same requirements for domestic spirits. Once again, a single distillery, bonded storage for at least 4 years, and bottled at 50% ABV. Since all Scotch whiskey warehouses are subject to bonding requirements, it theoretically could be done, except for one major stumbling block. The U.S. regulations also say specifically that for an imported spirit to be labeled as bottled in bond, the country of origin has to have its own regulations authorizing the use of the term bottled in bond. Now, if the Scotch Whisky Association wants to have a crack at changing the Scotch Whisky Act of 2009 to include a bottled in bond provision, go for it. If you have something you'd like us to look at on an upcoming episode, just use the contact form at whiskycast.com to get in touch with us. Behind the Label is brought to you by Writer's Tears.
Writer's Tears Copper Pot, an 18th century style of premium Irish whiskey, blended from single pot still and single malt. Like yourself, it's one of life's treasured rarities, and what's rare is wonderful. Writer's Tears Copper Pot.
That's all for this edition of WhiskyCast. You'll find links for the stories in this episode in our show notes at whiskycast.com. That's also where you'll find the latest whiskey news, my tasting notes, the calendar of events, the whiskey photo of the week, and, of course, a complete archive of all of our past episodes that goes all the way back to 2005. Get in touch with us on Twitter, Instagram, and Facebook at WhiskyCast. The email address is comments@whiskycast.com.
And now, a message from Robin Redbreast.
Ever go out drinking with a peacock? Always the same. Few too many, tail feathers come out, drinks get knocked over, bartender's not happy, night's over before it started. All I'm saying is, don't be the peacock in your group.
Proud sponsor of WhiskyCast. Redbreast. Pass it on.
I can't think of a better way to celebrate a round of Whiskey Cast or golf than with a Dewar's 19-Year-Old Champions Edition. Here's to another round, friends. Cheers.
WhiskyCast is a production of Cask Strength Media, copyright 2022, and comes to you from the charming, yet regrettably dry town of Haddonfield, New Jersey. I'm Mark Gillespie, reminding you that when you drink, please drink responsibly. Thanks for listening.